Montana Territory, October 1883. The wind cut sharp across the tracks just south of Livingston, carrying the chill of early snow and the scent of coal smoke long faded. The last train had pulled out nearly an hour ago, but the girl sat there still, knees drawn tight, cotton dress thin as paper, eyes fixed east like she meant to will the rails to run backwards. Orin Darlow reined in his gelding and slid off the saddle, boots crunching frostbitten gravel. He had not meant to stop. He had just delivered 2 mares to a ranch up near Emigrant when he spotted the figure curled near the siding like a dropped rag doll. She did not flinch when he approached, just turned her head slow, like it took effort. "I waited until the train left without me," she said softly. Orin crouched beside her. "Why would you do a thing like that?" Her lips were blue. "Because I changed my mind." He glanced down the track. Nothing but empty rails and the echo of departure. "Where were you headed?" "Anywhere but where I came from." She looked about 20. Her shoes were worn near through, and her fingers trembled as she tried to smooth her skirt over her knees. She had the kind of face you remembered: strong jaw, wide eyes, stubborn mouth. Her hair was the color of burnt honey, tied back with a fraying ribbon. "I am Orin Darlow," he said finally. "I have a horse and a warm fire 10 miles from here. You look like you could use both." She hesitated, eyes studying his face like she was deciding whether to trust him. "I will not hurt you," he added, "and I will not ask you anything you do not want to answer." She swallowed, then nodded once. "Della, Zane." They rode double, her arms looped around his waist with the lightest grip, like she was ready to let go if she had to. The sky turned to ash behind them, and the wind grew colder. Orin kept his eyes forward, but he could feel her head rest briefly against his back. Just once. Just enough. His cabin sat tucked against a grove of pines beside the Yellowstone River. One room, rough-hewn but warm. He stoked the fire, pulled a blanket from the cot, and handed it to her with a tin cup of coffee. She took both with quiet hands. "Thank you." He nodded and sat across from her, the fire between them. For a long while they said nothing. The fire cracked. The wind howled. Her hands slowly stopped shaking. "I was supposed to board that train to St. Louis," she said finally, eyes fixed on the flames. "But I could not do it. I stood there and watched the doors close. I kept thinking, if I leave Montana, I leave everything I ever fought for behind." Orin leaned forward. "What did you fight for?" She hesitated. "Myself." That hung in the air between them. She glanced over at him. "You live out here alone," he nodded. 5 years now. Got tired of noise. You came from a town, Cheyenne. Used to ride with the mail line. Then I saw a man die in front of me and decided I did not want to watch people break any more." She nodded like she understood that too well. "You have anyone?" he asked, her eyes dimmed. "No. My father died 3 winters ago. Mama passed years before. The man I was supposed to marry turned drunk and mean before I ever said yes. I left last week, took what was mine and ran." Orin watched her carefully. "You are safe here. You do not owe me anything." "I know," she said, voice steady now. "That is why I stayed." The next morning, the frost was thick and the air sharp. Orin made cornmeal and coffee while Della stepped outside, wrapped in his spare coat. He watched her walk slow to the river's edge, her breath hanging white in the air. She came back with wet lashes and a tighter mouth. "You all right?" he asked. "I am trying to be." He looked at her, really looked. "You do not have to try by yourself." She paused. "I have never had anyone say that to me." He did not press it. Instead, he picked up his saddle. "I need to check the fence line. You are welcome to stay, rest, or ride with me." She looked down at her borrowed boots, then up at him. "I will ride." They made it halfway across the northern ridge before the snow started again, soft and slow. Della rode beside him now, her cheeks pink from cold, hair tucked beneath a knit cap he had found in a trunk. She laughed once when her horse stumbled over a root, and the sound startled him. It was the first time he had heard it. "You do not laugh much," he said. "I forgot how." He gave her a small smile. "Then we will find it again." They crested the hill and looked out over the wide valley. The river cut silver through the trees. Smoke curled from the chimney of a neighbor's place, but otherwise the land felt untouched. Della turned to him. "Why are you being kind to me?" He met her eyes. "Because I want to be, and because it feels right." She studied him. "You do not even know me." "I know you were shivering by the tracks and you let the train leave without you. That tells me you are brave enough to stop running." "That is enough for now." Her mouth parted like she wanted to say something, but instead she nodded slowly and looked back out at the land. That night, she helped him chop kindling. He handed her gloves too big for her hands and she wore them anyway. After supper, she fell asleep in the rocking chair by the fire, her face soft in the glow. Orin watched her, heart tight in his chest. He had not meant for this. He did not even know what it was yet, but something had shifted. The quiet in the cabin no longer felt lonely, just full. He covered her with the blanket and sat nearby, listening to the snow fall outside and the slow, even sound of her breathing. The next morning she was standing at the stove when he woke, hair tied back, sleeves rolled. She turned and smiled. "I found the flour." "Hope you like biscuits." He sat up, surprised. "You did not have to cook. I wanted to." She looked different in the morning light, stronger, steadier. As they ate, she glanced at him. "If I asked to stay here a little longer, would that be all right?" He set down his cup. "Yes. As long as you want." She let out a soft breath and looked down at her plate. "I never thought I would feel safe again." "You are," he said. "With me, you are." She looked up, eyes shining. "Thank you, Orin." He reached across the table, fingers just brushing hers. Neither of them moved away. The next few days passed quiet, the kind of quiet that settled in the bones rather than pressed on the skin. Della took to rising early, standing at the window before the sun had cleared the pines. As if the frost-laced stillness of morning might offer answers she hadn't yet worked up the nerve to ask. Orin noticed the way she moved through the cabin now, not tentative, not yet at ease, but with a kind of deliberate grace, like she was learning how to belong to stillness again. She'd taken to mending things with his old sewing kit, a torn saddlebag, a frayed cuff, a corner of the old quilt that had come undone. He didn't ask her to. She didn't ask if she could. On the fourth evening, after supper, she leaned against the doorframe and watched the light bend low across the valley. Her voice broke the hush. "Do you remember the first time you knew you couldn't go back to who you were before?" Orin looked up from where he was oiling his rifle. "Yeah. I was 23. Saw a man drown in a river his brother pushed him into. They'd been drinking. I tried to pull him out, but the current caught him too fast. I stopped riding with them after that." She turned her head toward him but didn't speak. "You?" he asked. Her hand curled around the edge of the doorframe. "I found a letter tucked behind my father's ledger, from the man I was supposed to marry. He'd written to another woman, promised her a house and a ring, said he'd be rid of the Zane girl soon enough. He didn't even bother to burn it." Orin set the cloth down. "You left that night?" "No. I waited 3 days. Buried my father proper first. Then I packed the mule, took enough flour and coin to last me to the next county. I wore my mother's brooch so I'd remember not to flinch." The wind stirred the trees outside. A hawk called high above the ridge. He stood and walked to the hearth, added another log to the fire. "You ever think about where you'd go if you could choose without fear?" She looked toward the river. "I don't know yet, but I don't think it's far from here." He nodded once, then poured water into the basin and handed her a clean cloth. "You've got cinders on your cheek." She took it, brushing it across her skin. I'm not used to staying still. I'm not used to someone staying. They looked at each other for a long moment. The room felt warmer than the fire could account for. Later, after the lamps were out and the wind had picked up, Orin lay awake on the cot, listening to the creak of the rocking chair. Della sat there wrapped in the quilt she'd mended, legs drawn up, eyes fixed on the window. She didn't know he was watching. "You can sleep in the bed tomorrow," he said into the dark. "I'll take the chair." There was a pause, then her voice quiet. "I'm not ready. I'm not asking for anything." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it harder." He turned his face toward the wall. "Take your time." She didn't answer, but he heard her rise, footsteps soft across the floorboards. A moment later the quilt settled over his shoulders, warm from her hands. Then she returned to the chair and said nothing else. Morning came slow, with a haze of fog drifting up from the river. Orin saddled the horses while Della packed a sack with bread and dried venison. They were heading west to trade for salt and sugar at a line cabin where a merchant passed through once each month. She mounted without needing help. They rode without much talk. The trail wound through thick timber, the air damp with pine and last night's rain. Around midday, they stopped to water the horses at an old spring nestled between two boulders. Della crouched, cupping water in her hands. "Used to think I'd end up back in St. Louis," she said. "Teaching, maybe, or sewing for a shop, something quiet. But now I can't picture it." He watched her, the way the light caught her profile. "That's not a bad thing. I know," she said. "I just don't know what this is instead." "You don't have to name it yet." She nodded, then stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. "I don't think you're what I expected." "What did you expect? Someone quieter or meaner, or with less patience?" He chuckled low. "I was all those things once," she tilted her head. "And now I've got reason to be different." They rode on without another word. But that night, back at the cabin, she stood just behind him as he lit the lamp. "I'll take the bed tonight," she said. He turned, surprised. But he didn't question her. She stepped past him, set her shawl on the peg by the window, and sat on the edge of the mattress. "You'll still be here in the morning," he met her gaze. "That's a promise." She pulled the blanket up to her waist, watching him settle into the chair. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. "Good night, Orin." "Good night, Della." And for the first time, it felt like the beginning of something neither of them needed to run from. The first snow came heavy, blanketing the valley 2 days after their trip west. It silenced the woods and softened the cabin's edges until it looked like it had always belonged to the land. Della stood at the window as the flakes thickened, her breath fogging the glass. Behind her, Orin was laying out the tools to sharpen the axe. She didn't turn when she spoke. "Does the river freeze solid?" "Not this close to the bend. Current stays quick enough." She nodded, fingertips tracing a pattern into the fogged pane. "I've never seen snow settle like this. Back home it melted by noon." He glanced toward her. "You miss it?" "No. Just didn't expect to feel like I've stepped into a place where time slows down." Orin set the whetstone aside. "That's what drew me here. The quiet doesn't ask anything of you." She turned then. "But it gives something back, doesn't it?" He met her gaze. "If you let it." Later, while he split logs outside, she brushed flour from the table and began mixing what she could find in the cupboard. She didn't ask for help, didn't ask for approval, she just worked, sleeves rolled, expression focused. When he came in, she was setting a pan into the hearth oven, the scent of sorghum and cinnamon already curling through the room. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. "What is that?" "Something my mother made for winter days. Sweetbread." "I think I remembered it right." "I'll believe you if I taste it." She glanced up, eyes catching his just long enough to warm something low in his chest. "Then you'll have to wait." As the bread baked, they sat near the fire. She picked lint from the hem of her skirt, while he ran a cloth over his saddle leather. The silence between them had grown easier, less like a bridge between strangers, more like the kind that comes when words aren't needed to mark understanding. Della set the brush down. "When you were a boy, what did you think your life would be?" "I figured I'd follow my father. He ran freight lines in Wyoming, died when I was 16, thrown from a wagon. After that, I thought maybe I'd end up shoeing horses for someone else." "Did you?" "For a while. Then I got restless." She looked over at the saddle. "You think you'll ever be done moving?" "I might be. I just didn't know it until now." The fire cracked softly. Neither of them looked away. That night, after they'd eaten warm slices of sweetbread and finished the last of the apple preserves from the cellar, Della stood at the hearth, brushing crumbs from her hands. The lamplight caught the gold in her hair, and Orin found himself watching the way she moved, precise, without hesitation. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "You ever think about what it means to stay?" He sat forward, elbows on his knees. "I do now." She turned slow. "And if I said I wanted to for more than a few days, would that change anything?" He stood. "Only in a way that feels right." Her voice was quiet. "I've never said that out loud, never let myself want something that didn't come with a cost." "There's no price here," he said. "Only choice." Della stepped closer, close enough that the heat from the fire wasn't the only thing between them. "Then I choose to stay." He didn't reach for her, not yet, but something settled in his face, something solid, like a man who'd found what he'd stopped believing was meant for him. "I'd be glad for that," he said. She exhaled, and it sounded like a door unlocking. That night, she moved the rocking chair beside the cot and slept there, close enough that their hands brushed once between dreams. Neither pulled away. In the morning, she woke first. The sky was pale and clean, and her breath no longer fogged the windowpane. She stepped outside to gather kindling, boots crunching fresh snow, coat pulled tight around her. Orin was already there, hat low, splitting wood in slow, even strokes. She stopped beside him. "I think I'd like to clear a patch of ground come spring. For planting." He paused, rested the axe upright. "We'll need to mark the soil before the thaw." She smiled then, a real one. Orin held her gaze. "If you'll have me in it." She didn't answer with words. Just reached out, took his gloved hand in hers, and held it like something she meant to keep. And he let her. By mid-November, the air no longer held to the afternoons. Cold settled early now, and the sky wore a pale, heavy look that warned of deeper winter coming. The woodpile stacked high against the north wall of the cabin, and a pair of venison hams hung curing in the shed. Orin had begun checking the trap lines again, walking the low ridges at dawn while Della swept ash from the hearth and boiled water for whatever needed cleaning. One morning she met him near the spring with a lidded tin in hand. "I boiled tallow with spruce needles," she said, offering it. "For your hands." He rubbed the salve over his knuckles without speaking. The scent was sharp, clean. When he looked at her, she lifted her chin a little, like she was waiting for him to judge it. "It's good," he said. She gave a faint nod. "It's the first thing I've made that wasn't food or a stitch." He screwed the lid back on. "You should make more. There's folks nearby who'd trade for something like this." "I thought about that," she said. "I'd need more jars. We can ask at the next supply run." Della crouched near the spring, pulling a few mint stems that had gone dry at the edges. "I didn't know I'd want to make things again. I thought I was done with that part of myself." "You're not done with anything," he said. She tilted her head, not quite looking at him. "It's different now. I don't want to prove anything to anyone. I just want to build something that lasts." Orin knelt beside her. "Then you will." "You already are." She didn't answer, but her fingers stilled on the mint. When she looked up, her eyes were dry, clear. That afternoon, they took the horses out to check the far gate near the cottonwoods. Della rode ahead without waiting, her braid tucked beneath a scarf, the rifle slung careful across her back. Orin followed her pace, watching the way she scanned the trees, a woman who had learned how to read the land, and not just the roads. At the gate, a section of wire had come loose from the post. Orin handed her the pliers without asking. She knelt, boots steady on the brittle grass, and fixed it with clean turns of her wrists. "You ever think about having land of your own?" she asked, not looking up. "I've thought about it more lately." She tightened the last twist. "What would you do with it? Grow barley, maybe, raise a few head, keep the fences sound." She stood, brushing her palms on her skirt. "And if I said I wanted to build a drying shed and keep bees come spring, I'd say we'd need to clear the south edge. It gets better light." She looked at him then, full on, and her breath came out slow. "You're not just saying that to please me." "No," he said. "I'm saying it because I want that too." The wind picked up, stirring the dry leaves around them. She stepped close, fingers wrapping around his wrist. "Then I think it's time I stopped waiting for the ground to shift beneath me. You're not standing alone anymore." They didn't speak again until they were halfway back to the cabin. The horses moved quiet beneath them, hooves muffled on the frozen earth. As they crossed the ridge, a coyote loped across the far field, lean and fast, vanishing into the trees. Della watched it go. "Do you ever miss the sound of other voices?" "Sometimes," Orin said, "but not more than I value the ones that stay." That night she didn't sit in the rocking chair. She banked the fire, folded her shawl, and stood beside the cot while Orin unlaced his boots. "I want to lie beside you," she said, "because it's mine to want, not because I'm afraid." He didn't touch her, just met her words with a steadiness that anchored her. "Then come here," he said. She did. There was no rush to the way they found each other. Just breathe and warmth, and the knowledge that neither of them needed to ask for permission anymore. Outside, the wind slipped through the trees. Inside, their hands learned the language of trust. They didn't speak again until morning, when Della stirred first and reached for his hand beneath the quilt. "You sleep?" she asked. "Better than I have in years." She turned toward him, eyes open to the pale light. "I want to stay through the thaw and the planting, and whatever comes after. Then we'll build it," he said. "Together." She kissed him, slow and quiet, as if claiming the day before it had even begun, and when she stepped outside to fetch water, the sun broke over the ridge, casting gold across the new snow. The thaw came slow that year, reluctant and stubborn, like the land wasn't quite ready to let go of its cold. The river ran faster by March, its edges breaking apart in jagged, groaning slabs. Orin watched from the porch one morning as Della stepped barefoot into the damp earth, toes sinking into the mud along the cabin's south side where the sun reached first. She held a spade in one hand, a sack of onion sets in the other. He leaned against the post. "You aiming to start a garden or a war?" She glanced up, cheeks flushed, hair pinned back with a length of twine. "You said the light was better here. I want early greens. I'll turn the ground deeper for you once it softens more." "I remember how," she said. "But I'd like you to do it anyway." He stepped down beside her, taking the spade. She watched him dig, the way his jaw set with each turn of the soil. When he paused to wipe his brow, she knelt beside him, pressing a set into the loosened earth. "There's a woman in Bozeman who sells calendula seed," she said. "I'd like to try drying the petals for salve." "We'll ride in next week," he said. "You can ask her yourself." She reached for another set, hands smudged brown. "You planning to stay beside me the whole way? Every mile?" Della stood and dusted her palms. "Then I reckon we need a second horse that can carry more than salt and flour." They traded for a mule named Agnes 2 weeks later. She was sway-backed and stubborn but sure-footed. Della led her home while Orin rode ahead, keeping watch for runoff that might have washed out the lower trail. That night, Agnes took up residence in the lean-to, and Della stood beside her stroking her ears, whispering something Orin didn't catch. At supper, she pulled out a folded paper from her coat pocket. "There's a notice nailed to the post outside the mercantile. Says the circuit preacher's due through Big Timber in May." Orin looked up from his plate. "You thinking of riding in to listen?" She slid the paper across the table. "I'm thinking maybe it's time we said what we already know." He didn't touch the paper, just reached for her hand. "You sure?" "I've slept beside you more nights than I can count. I work this land like it's mine. I want to wake up knowing there's no more waiting left between us." Orin nodded once. "Then we'll go." They rode out the day before, camping beneath a stand of old firs just past the river ford. Della spread her shawl against the saddle blanket and they sat close, sharing cornbread and dried pears. "You miss anything from your old life?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I've never had anything like this before." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "What do you want most now?" He held her tighter. "To never give you any reason to walk away." "I'm not the walking away kind," she said. "Not anymore." Big Timber was quiet when they arrived. Just a few wagons gathered near the old livery and a handful of families waiting near the schoolhouse where the preacher had set up. Della wore her mother's brooch pinned to a simple wool dress. Orin had shaved, his collar pressed flat with care. They stood before the preacher with snow still clinging to the mountains behind them, hands clasped, eyes steady. When the words were said and the Bible closed, Della looked up at him and smiled, not wide, not showy, but full of something rooted and certain. He bent his head to hers, and the kiss they shared wasn't for the crowd or the preacher or the moment. It was for every morning they'd already lived and everyone still to come. They rode home slow, stopping once near the ridge to watch the deer move through the new grass. Orin reached over and touched her knee. "Next winter, we'll have jars lined all along the shelf," he said. "And bees hived by the shed," she added. "And maybe a cradle if the timing's right." She looked at him, eyes clear. "I'd like that." They made it back by dusk, the cabin standing solid against the slope, smoke curling from the chimney. Agnes brayed once as they passed, and Della laughed, slipping down from the saddle with practiced ease. Inside, she hung their coats and lit the lamp. Orin poured water into the basin while she pulled the bread from its cloth. They moved around each other like they'd always known how, like the quiet between them was a kind of language all its own. Later, with the fire low, she sat curled against him on the cot, his arm around her waist, her hand resting over his heart. "There's no part of me left afraid," she whispered. "You never needed to be," he said. "I know that now." Spring came in full before May ended, bringing wildflowers and the hum of bees near the south slope. The onions took root, and the first green shoots broke through the soil. Della spent mornings in the garden, and Orin took to repairing the fence near the western edge. Some evenings, they walked the edge of the river, hands joined, boots damp from the thaw. By midsummer, the shed stood tall behind the cabin, planked by Orin and painted by Della. She hung bundles of drying herbs from the rafters, and he built her a stool so she could sit while cutting roots. Her salves filled half a crate by August, and folks began stopping by on the trail, asking for jars in exchange for eggs or wool or stories. One night, with the sun bleeding orange over the hills, Orin sat beside her on the porch, a mug of chicory in his hand. She leaned into him, her belly just beginning to swell beneath her dress. "You ever think about how we got here?" she asked. He looked out across the field. "Every day," she smiled. "I think I like who I've become. I know I do." They sat in silence, the good kind, while the crickets began their low song and the stars blinked on. The land held them, the house warmed them, and they had each other, two people who had once been lost, now found in the rhythm of ordinary days made sacred by the love they chose, over and over, without fear, without pause, without end.